All right, welcome to The Explainer. We are about to go back in time, almost 400 years, to look at the absolutely wild story of the world's first ever speculative bubble. It's a financial craze that, well, basically took over an entire country. Okay, just look at this number for a second. 5,500 guilders. Now, you have to understand, back in the 17th century, that was a truly staggering amount of money. Just astronomical. So, what do you think that could buy you? Maybe a fleet of ships? A huge country estate? Nope, it bought you this, a single flower bulb. I'm not kidding, a tulip bulb that was worth more, literally more, than a fancy mansion right on a canal in Amsterdam. Which brings us to the big question, right? How in the world did a simple flower kick off a financial mania that people would be talking about and warning about for hundreds of years? Well, let's get into it. So to really get this, we have to picture the scene. It's the Dutch Golden Age. The Netherlands is basically a global superpower. There's just wealth pouring in from trade everywhere. And when you have a society with a ton of new money, well, people get really creative finding ways to show off just how rich they are. The funny thing is, the tulip isn't even from Holland. It actually showed up as this exotic import from the Ottoman Empire, way back in the mid-1500s. And for a while, it was just a really pretty but kind of normal flower. That all changed in 1593. A botanist named Carolus Clusius figured out, hey, these things can actually grow really well here. And because their colors were so vibrant and so different from anything else in Europe, they just blew up. They became the ultimate status symbol for wealthy people. But look at that last date, 1634. That's when things really took a turn. It wasn't about flowers anymore. Speculators jumped in, and that's when the real frenzy kicked off. But, okay, what made some tulips so much more valuable than others? Get this, it was actually a disease. A beautiful one, but still a disease. A type of mosaic virus would infect the bulbs, and it caused the petals to break into these incredible, multicolored, flame-like patterns. You couldn't plan for it, you couldn't replicate it on purpose. It was a total fluke of nature, which made these broken bulbs super, super rare. And because they were so rare, they became insanely valuable. And at the very top, the absolute king of all these broken bulbs was the Semper Augustus. I mean, just look at it. It had these amazing crimson streaks on a pure white background. It was legendary. At the peak of this whole thing, there were only something like a dozen of these bulbs in existence. They were, without a doubt, the most desirable things in the entire country. Okay, to really wrap your head around this, just look at what you could get for a single bulb of a slightly less rare type of tulip. For the price of one bulb, you could get 4 oxen, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, tons of beer and wine, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a whole bed. I mean, you're basically talking about everything you'd need to live and then some. It was more money than a skilled worker would make in 10 years. The prices were just out of this world. So you're probably wondering, how did this whole market even function? How did prices get so completely disconnected from reality? Well, it all comes down to something they called trading on the wind. Yeah, the secret sauce to this whole frenzy was this idea of windhandel, which translates to wind trade. And this is so important to understand. At the height of it all, nobody was actually handing over physical tulip bulbs, especially not in the winter when they were still in the ground. No, they were trading pieces of paper, basically futures contracts, that were just a promise to buy a bulb later on. The whole market became completely abstract, totally separate from the actual flower. And according to the traditional story, this wasn't just a playground for the rich. The lure of getting rich quick was just too strong. It pulled in people from literally every social class. You had nobles, farmers, sailors, all the way down to maidservants and chimney sweeps. I mean, the story goes that people were selling everything they owned just to get a piece of the action. And the speed of it all was just insane. These paper contracts were being flipped multiple times a day in local taverns. People were making paper fortunes in a matter of hours. And the whole thing was running on one simple idea, that no matter how much you paid, there was always someone else, a greater fool, who would come along and pay even more. And then, just like that, it all came crashing down. In February of 1637, at a totally normal bulb auction in a town called Haarlem, the bidding started and there was silence. No one was buying. They dropped the price. Still nothing. And that's all it took. A wave of panic just shot through the market. The bubble had popped. So yeah, the crash hurt a lot of people financially. But the real question, the one that's still so fascinating today, is why? Why did this even happen? And to answer that, we have to look at the psychology of crowds. At the heart of it all is something called herd behavior. And really, it's a basic human instinct, right? Way back when, sticking with the herd meant you're safe from, a saber-toothed tiger. In finance, it means you're safe from being the one person who doesn't get rich. When you see your friends and neighbors making a killing, that fear of missing out, what we now call FOMO, is just incredibly powerful. It can completely shut down the rational part of your brain. And here's the thing about bubbles. They aren't totally random. They tend to follow a pretty predictable script. And this is it. First, you get the displacement. Some new, exciting thing shows up, like the rare tulips. Then you get the boom phase, where prices start rising and everyone's talking about it. That leads straight into euphoria, when everyone throws caution to the wind and prices just go parabolic. But then, the smart money starts cashing out, taking profits. And that's the beginning of the end, which leads to panic. Everybody tries to sell at once, and the whole thing just collapses. Tulip Mania is the textbook example of the cycle. Now, that classic story of an entire nation going bankrupt over tulips, it's a great story. But is it actually what happened? Well, modern historians have gone back and looked at the actual records, and, well, the real story is a little more complicated. So let's break it down, myth versus reality. The myth, the entire country was obsessed. The reality, it was mostly a smallish group of pretty wealthy merchants and artisans playing the game. The myth, the Dutch economy was completely ruined. The reality, look, the Netherlands had the strongest economy on the planet at the time. This whole thing was barely a blip on their national radar. It was a social shock, for sure, but it wasn't some kind of economic apocalypse. And what about the idea that it was just pure, irrational madness? Well, maybe not entirely. Some economists have pointed out that there might have been some logical reasons for the price surge. For one thing, the government was thinking about changing the law to turn these futures contracts into something like a modern options contract. That basically means if the price crashed, you could just walk away from the deal by paying a small penalty. So if your risk is capped, it's actually kind of rational to be willing to pay a higher price, right? Okay, so if it wasn't this massive economic disaster that ruined the country, why are we still talking about it 400 years later? The answer is that its real legacy isn't about economics, it's about psychology. It was a huge social shock. Think about it. For the first time, a whole group of people had to face this weird, unsettling idea that the price of something could have absolutely nothing to do with its actual intrinsic value. It created this crisis of trust. It made everyone ask, what is anything really worth? And this is a pattern we see over and over and over again. Just look here. Back in 1637, the price of a tulip had nothing to do with it being a flower. Then, fast forward to the year 2000, the price of a dot-com stock was all about hopes and dreams, not actual profits. And today, with some digital assets, their value is often built on scarcity and just the shared belief that they're valuable. The specific thing changes, but the human behavior, it looks almost identical. And that's really its lasting power. Tulip Mania isn't just history anymore. It's become the go-to metaphor, right? It's the shorthand we all use for any time a huge economic bubble gets inflated by greed and hype, and reason just seems to go right out the window. So that leaves us with one last big question. We have known about this story for 400 years. We've studied it, we've broken down the psychology, we know all the warning signs, and yet we seem to do it again and again. So why? Why do we keep falling for bubbles? Maybe the answer has less to do with our understanding of finance and more to do with just being human.